Daughter-in-law leaned across the table at my son's birthday dinner and told the restaurant manager, loud enough for the whole room to hear, his mother isn't on the guest list. She can pay for herself. My son looked up from his phone, nodded once, and went back to scrolling. I didn't say a word. I just reached into the inside pocket of my sport coat and set something on the table that made every person within 20 feet go completely silent. Before I tell you what that was, I need to go back to the beginning, because none of this started at that restaurant. It started 43 years ago, in a house on Birchwood Lane in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with a boy who used to fall asleep in my arms during thunderstorms. My name is Jim. I'm 68 years old. I worked 31 years as a high school principal in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. My wife Beverly was an elementary school librarian for 26 years. We were not wealthy people. We clipped coupons. We bought our cars used. We took one vacation a year, always somewhere we could drive to, always off-season because the rates were lower. But we were stable and we were proud, and we raised our son Cody to understand the value of what that stability cost. Cody is 41 now. When he was growing up, he was the kind of kid other parents pointed to. Straight A's. Eagle Scout. First in his class at the University of Oklahoma. After graduate school in finance, he moved to Dallas and built what looked, from the outside, like a very successful life. He married a woman named Shara 4 years ago. She was 34, worked in marketing, had a smile that I can only describe as efficient, the kind of smile that activates when it needs to and powers down when it doesn't. Beverly noticed it before I did. She told me, on the drive home from their wedding reception, that Shara hadn't asked her a single question the entire evening. Not one. Beverly had tried twice to start a conversation, and both times Shara had answered in 3 words or less and turned away. I told Beverly she was being too sensitive. I told her Shara was just nervous. That was my first mistake. Beverly has type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed at 32, back when Cody was still in elementary school. We had good insurance for most of our working lives, and we managed. But when I retired at 63 and Beverly at 61, we moved to Medicare and a supplement plan, and the gap started showing. The insulin she needed, the specific kind her endocrinologist had her on for 15 years, wasn't covered the same way anymore. The out-of-pocket cost hit us at $480 a month. On top of that, she had developed peripheral neuropathy in her feet, which meant regular podiatry appointments, compression supplies, and the wound care specialist she saw every 6 weeks. We weren't drowning. Not at first. My pension from the school district, combined with Beverly's and our Social Security, gave us right around $58,000 a year. In Tulsa, that's livable. Tight, but livable. We paid off the house in 2019, which helped. But then my prostate started giving me trouble, and the urologist visits added up, and Beverly's A1C climbed despite doing everything right, and the wound on her right heel that had started as a blister from ill-fitting shoes became something that required professional care twice a week. By the spring of last year, we were spending about $900 a month on medical expenses that weren't covered. $900 out of a fixed income. We burned through most of our savings cushion. We hadn't told Cody any of this. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't pride exactly. It was more that every time I tried to bring up anything real with him in the past 2 years, Shara was in the room, or he was distracted, or the conversation somehow pivoted to what they were doing, where they were going, what Shara had accomplished recently. He called on my birthday, called on Father's Day, texted on Christmas. He hadn't visited Tulsa in 14 months. When he called in late March to say they'd be in town for a long weekend and wanted to take us out to celebrate his upcoming 42nd birthday. A belated celebration, he said, since they'd spent his actual birthday in Cabo. I told Beverly that night that I thought maybe things were turning around. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses and said, "Jim, honey, just that. Nothing else." But I heard everything she meant. Cody picked the restaurant, a place called Hargrove's on the south side of Tulsa. I'd driven past it 100 times. White tablecloths visible through the window, a valet stand, small menu cards in the door. The kind of place where you don't ask the price because asking means you can't afford it. I looked up the menu online the night before. The cheapest entree was $38. Beverly had a bad day that Friday. Her glucose had been unstable all week, and the heel wound had been weeping more than usual. She'd redressed it twice. She didn't say she didn't want to go. She just got quieter than normal, and her movements got slower. And I watched her take 20 minutes to get her earrings in because her hands were shaking. "We can cancel," I said. "It's Cody's birthday," she said. That was the end of the discussion. We got there a few minutes early, which I always do out of habit. The host showed us to a round table near the window. Nice table. Cody had probably requested it. We sat and waited. Beverly kept her hands in her lap, which she does when she doesn't want anyone to see them trembling. They arrived 12 minutes late. Shara first. She always came through a door like she was expecting someone to photograph her. Then Cody behind her, his phone already in his hand, his eyes on the screen. He hugged Beverly carefully, the way you hug someone you're not quite sure about the structural integrity of. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Hey Dad, you guys look great." Shara air-kissed Beverly's cheek and said, "Beverly, love that blouse." Her eyes were already moving to the menu. We sat. The server came, introduced himself as Todd. Shara ordered a bottle of Sanseri immediately, the way people do when they want the room to know they know what Sanseri is. Cody said he'd have whatever she was having. Beverly asked for still water. I asked for unsweetened iced tea. The conversation moved the way it always did with Shara in the room. Smooth, fast, and entirely in one direction. She'd just been promoted to regional vice president. They were redoing the kitchen in their Dallas house. They were looking at a property in Telluride just as an investment, not necessarily for personal use. Cody nodded and smiled and occasionally added details, like a man who'd learned which parts of the story he was responsible for. Beverly asked about Cody's work. He was in wealth management, had his own small practice with 2 associates. He said things were going well. He didn't ask how we were. I sat with that fact for a while, turning it over in my mind. He didn't ask. Not once in 45 minutes did either of them ask how we were doing. The food came. Shara had ordered the roasted duck, market price, which Todd had told us was $62. Cody had the ribeye, $54. Beverly had ordered the salmon, $41, which I'd watched her choose after looking at the prices carefully, eliminating 2 things she'd clearly wanted. I'd ordered the chicken, $38. Beverly took 3 bites of the salmon and set her fork down. Her heel was hurting. I could see it in the way she was sitting. Cody was talking about Telluride again, about the rental yield on ski properties, and something about depreciation schedules. Shara was nodding along, resting her chin on one hand, looking pleased. And then Beverly's phone buzzed. She looked at it and something changed in her face, a kind of careful stillness. She set the phone face down, and I reached over and put my hand over hers. "What?" I said quietly. "It's the insurance," she said just as quiet. "They're denying the wound care claim again. 3rd month in a row." I kept my face neutral. The wound care was $1,400 a month. Without the reimbursement we'd been counting on, we were going to be short on the mortgage payment, which we hadn't actually paid off, I should clarify. I'd said we had in 2019, but what I'd meant was that we'd refinanced and lowered the payment. We still owed 11 years on it. "We'll figure it out," I said. Beverly nodded and put her phone in her purse. Across the table, Cody was still talking. He hadn't noticed anything. When Todd came back to ask about dessert, Shara immediately said she wanted the creme brulee. Cody said he'd try the chocolate torte. Beverly said she was fine. "Nothing for her, thank you." I said the same. And then Todd set the check presenter in the center of the table. Shara reached for it before anyone else could move. She opened it, looked at the total, and her eyes did a quick calculation. Then she closed the presenter and set it back down. She looked at Todd directly and said, "We'll need to split this. They're portioned separately." She gestured toward Beverly and me with a small flick of her wrist. "The older couple." Todd blinked. "I'm sorry?" "2 checks," Shara said. She had the smooth patience of someone who was used to giving instructions. "One for us, one for them." Todd looked at Cody. Cody looked at his phone. "That works," Cody said, not looking up. I watched Beverly's face. I watched the exact moment those words settled into her. Her expression didn't collapse. She was too dignified for that. But something around her eyes went soft and distant, and she looked down at the tablecloth, and one hand moved slowly to her lap. 43 years I'd known that woman. I knew what that look meant. I reached into the inside pocket of my sport coat. What I set on the table wasn't dramatic looking. Just a plain white envelope, letter-sized, the kind you'd use to mail a bill. I set it down in the center of the table, flat, and I kept my hand on top of it for a moment. "Todd," I said, "the check's been taken care of." Shara's head came up. "Excuse me, I called ahead this afternoon," I said, "spoke with the manager, paid for the table, the whole table." I looked at Todd. "Isn't that right?" Todd straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. Mr. Mystery, Crawford called at 2:30 this afternoon. Paid in full. Cash." He glanced at Shara. "There's nothing to split." Shara stared at Todd like he'd said something in a foreign language. Cody set his phone down. I lifted my hand from the envelope and pushed it toward the center of the table. "I want you to look at what's in that envelope," I said. My voice was calm. It's the voice I used for 31 years when a student was sitting across from me, and I needed them to understand that what happened next depended on what they did in the next few minutes. Cody reached for the envelope. His jaw was tight. He opened it. Inside was not one document. There were several folded together. The first one he unfolded was a letter. My handwriting, on lined paper, front and back. "Read it out loud," I said. "Dad." "Cody, please." He looked at Beverly. She was still looking at the tablecloth. He looked back at the letter. He read. What he read, out loud, in a restaurant where 3 surrounding tables had gone very quiet, was this. That 11 years ago, when his mother was first showing signs of neuropathy and we were worried about where things were heading medically, I had cashed out a retirement account early. The penalty and the taxes on that withdrawal had cost us $22,000. The remainder, $46,000, had gone to Cody because he'd just started his practice and needed capital for licensing, office setup, and his first year of operating expenses. He'd asked us for a loan. We'd given it as a gift. He'd said he would pay us back. We'd said not to worry about it. He never mentioned it again. That 3 years ago, when Beverly's insulin regimen changed and our supplement plan didn't cover the new formulation, we started paying the difference out of pocket. $480 a month. For 36 months, that was $17,280. That the wound on Beverly's right heel, which had started 14 months ago, had cost us in uninsured wound care, supplies, and specialist copays, $8,900 so far, with no end date from the doctor. That I had been prescribed medication for early-stage prostate issues 8 months ago, and the medication not covered by Medicare ran $220 a month. That the insurance denial we'd received 90 minutes ago at this table while Cody was talking about ski property depreciation meant that we would be unable to make our mortgage payment in full next month. That I was not telling him any of this to ask for help. I was telling him because his wife had just instructed a server to separate his parents' check from theirs at a dinner we hadn't chosen and couldn't really afford to attend, and I needed him to understand what that gesture had cost, measured against what was real. By the time Cody finished reading, his hands were shaking. Shara had stopped moving entirely. "There's more in the envelope," I said. He reached back in. He pulled out the insurance denial letter, dated that day. He pulled out a printout of the wound care billing from the last 6 months. He pulled out a single pharmacy receipt for Beverly's insulin, with the insurance non-covered amount circled in pen. The table behind us had completely stopped talking. Cody looked up at me. His eyes were red. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" I looked at my son, my boy who used to fall asleep in my arms during thunderstorms. "When was I supposed to tell you, Cody? You haven't been to Tulsa in over a year. You don't ask how we are. You talk, we listen. That's how it's been." I kept my voice even. "Tonight your wife told the server to split our check, while your mother was sitting here having found out that the insurance denied her wound care again. And you nodded. You didn't even look up." Cody's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Shara said, "This is incredibly inappropriate. You're making a scene." I turned to look at her. I took my time. "My wife," I said, "has been in pain for 14 months from a wound that isn't healing because we can't afford to see the specialist more than twice a month. She came tonight because it was your birthday dinner and she loves her son. She ordered the second cheapest thing on the menu. She ate 3 bites. And you flagged the server to separate her check." I folded my hands on the table. "Tell me which part of that is appropriate, and I'll tell you which part of this is a scene." Shara opened her mouth, closed it. From somewhere behind me, I heard a woman say quietly, "Oh my Lord." I wasn't done. "The $46,000, I said, looking back at Cody. "I never told your mother where that money went. She thinks the retirement withdrawal paid for roof repairs and the new HVAC unit. Because that's what I told her. Because you asked me not to tell her you needed help because you didn't want her to worry." I paused. "I kept that secret for 11 years. I kept it because I trusted you, and I want you to look at your mother right now and understand what that secret cost me." Beverly had looked up. She was watching me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not hurt, something older and quieter than both of those things. "Jim," she said softly, "you didn't tell me." "No," I said. "I didn't." She looked at Cody. He was crying now, which surprised me, because I hadn't seen my son cry since he was 17 and we lost our dog. These weren't performed tears. They were the kind that come from somewhere in the chest that's been sealed off for too long. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked on the word. Just that one word. Beverly didn't say anything. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Shara was very still. She'd set her wineglass down and was looking at a point on the wall slightly above my left shoulder. The brulee sat untouched in front of her. It was the manager who stepped in eventually. His name was Perry, a big man in his 50s with careful eyes and a measured way of moving through a room. He had clearly been standing at a respectful distance for some portion of the conversation. He came to the table quietly and addressed me first. "Mr. Crawford," he said, "I want you to know that everything's handled, and I want to offer something." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. "My wife is a certified diabetes educator and care coordinator. She runs a nonprofit clinic on the north side, works with patients who have coverage gaps. Medicare, Medicaid, underinsured. She's helped a lot of people in your wife's situation navigate the appeals process for denials like the one you mentioned. She's very good." He set the card on the table beside my hand. "I'd like her to call Mrs. Crawford tomorrow, if that's acceptable." I looked at the card, then at Perry. "Why?" I said. He paused for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say. "My mother was a teacher," he said finally. 34 years, she retired without much. My father passed when I was young, and she raised 3 of us on a teacher's salary. When she got sick, she had the same kinds of gaps. Nobody helped her figure it out until it was very late." He straightened slightly. "I try to do things differently when I can." I picked up the card. "Thank you, Perry." He nodded and stepped back, and the table was quiet again. Cody wiped his face with his napkin. He looked at the documents still spread in front of him, at the pharmacy receipt, at the denial letter. He picked up the denial letter and read it, all of it, the full page of insurance language that meant the wound on his mother's heel was going to keep getting worse because the reimbursement that would have paid for the specialist to look at it had been declined for the 3rd consecutive month. He set it down. "I'm going to take care of this," he said. He wasn't looking at Shara when he said it. He was looking at Beverly. All of it. The denial, the back billing, the insulin. "I'm going to take care of it," Beverly said. "Cody, you don't have to, Mom." His voice was firm in a way I hadn't heard from him in years, something that sounded like the boy I'd raised. "I do. I really do." Shara pushed her chair back from the table. The legs scraped. "I need some air," she said, and walked toward the entrance without looking at anyone. Cody watched her go. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad." "Yeah. I've been gone," he said. It wasn't an excuse. It was a description, the kind of honest, plain accounting that I used to try to teach students to do when they'd been avoiding something. "I've been away, and I told myself that no news was good news, and I didn't." He stopped, started again. "I didn't ask." "No," I said. "You didn't. I'm sorry." I let that sit for a moment. Outside the window, the parking lot lights had come on. Beverly was still holding Cody's hand across the table. The couple at the table behind us were talking again in low voices. The restaurant was returning to itself. "I know you are," I said. We stayed another hour. We didn't talk about Shara. We didn't talk about the $46,000 or the insurance or any of it. We talked about Cody's first apartment in Norman, the one with the broken radiator that hissed all winter. We talked about the trip we'd taken to the Ozarks when he was 12. The canoe we'd rented that sprang a leak. Beverly told the story about the time Cody was 9 years old and decided to make us breakfast. and somehow managed to set a dish towel on fire, and he laughed the way he used to laugh before he learned to keep it calibrated to the room. I paid for the parking on the way out. Habit. In the weeks that followed, I learned what Cody did and didn't do in pieces, and Zen more completely. What he did, he called Beverly the next morning and asked her to send him the insurance denial letter. He had a contact at a patient advocacy firm that handled exactly these kinds of Medicare supplement disputes. Within 3 weeks, the wound care claim had been approved retroactively for the prior 3 months, and the current authorization was extended for 6. He set up automatic payments for Beverly's insulin, no longer going through our account, and he never made a production of it, just called to let me know it was handled. He drove to Tulsa in early May. Not for a weekend event, not attached to a trip somewhere else, just to come. He stayed 4 days. He fixed the fence gate I'd been meaning to get to for 2 summers. He sat with Beverly while she did her glucose readings and asked her questions about the management routine. Real questions, the kind that men he'd been reading. He went with me to my urologist appointment and sat in the waiting room with a book, and didn't check his phone the whole time I was inside. He didn't talk about what had happened at the restaurant. Neither did I. Some things don't need to be reopened once they've been understood. What he did not do, I came to realize, was go home to Shara. Not right away. He'd gotten a hotel in Dallas for a few weeks, which he mentioned almost in passing, carefully, like he didn't want me to feel responsible. 2 months later, he told me they were separating. He said it calmly, in the way he'd learned to say hard things, the same way his mother did. He said that he'd spent a long time trying to keep a life that looked right from the outside, and that the dinner had been a kind of mirror, and he hadn't liked what he'd seen of himself in it. I told him I was sorry. I meant it. He said, "Don't be. I needed to see it." Perry's wife, whose name was Angela, called Beverly the morning after the dinner, as he promised. She was exactly what Perry had described. She spent 90 minutes on the phone with Beverly that first call, going through the denial, explaining the appeals language, identifying 2 other coverage gaps that Beverly hadn't known she could contest. Over the next 4 months, Angela helped us recover nearly $7,000 in claims we'd written off as losses. She also connected Beverly with a wound care program at St. Francis that worked on a sliding scale basis. By August, Beverly's heel was showing real improvement for the first time in over a year. I went back to Hargrove's once, alone, on a Tuesday afternoon, just to thank Perry properly. He wasn't there, his day off. And I left a note with the host. On the way out, I stood in the parking lot for a moment and thought about the drive over with Beverly the night of the dinner. The way she'd taken 20 minutes with her earrings. The way she'd said, "It's Cody's birthday." And that had been the end of it. She'd known, I think, before I did. Known that something was going to have to break open that night. One way or another. She'd gotten dressed and come anyway. There's a thing that happens, I found, when you spend a long time trying not to cause trouble. You get so good at absorbing that you forget you're doing it. You call it patience. You call it perspective. You tell yourself that the important thing is that the people you love are doing well, and you measure their doing well by their surfaces, their careers and their houses, and the confidence in their voices. And you forget to check whether any of that is being built on something solid, or whether some of it is being built on what you gave and never told them was gone. I'm not telling this story to indict my son. Cody is a good man who had gotten lost inside a life that had been designed around the wrong things. The dinner didn't fix that. It just made it impossible to keep pretending. What I am telling you, if you're watching this and you recognize any part of what I've described, if you have parents you haven't truly checked on in a while, if you've been measuring their well-being by whether they say they're fine, is that "I'm fine" is almost never the whole truth from people who are raised not to burden the ones they love. Ask the next question. And the one after that. Last Father's Day, Cody drove up from Dallas. He brought Beverly flowers, grocery store carnations in a plastic wrap, the same kind she'd always liked more than the expensive ones anyway. He'd made a reservation at a diner on 41st that we've been going to since he was small enough to sit in a booster seat, booths with cracked vinyl, coffee that comes with the meal, a piece of pie under a glass dome on the counter. We sat for 3 hours. Nobody ordered the market price anything. The total for all 3 of us was $61, and Cody paid it, and Beverly argued briefly, and he said, "Mom, please," and she let him. On the drive home, Beverly fell asleep in the passenger seat the way she sometimes does now, her head tilted toward the window, her hands quiet in her lap. I drove through the familiar streets of the city I've lived in for 40 years, and I thought about what it costs to love people. The real cost, the one you carry without telling anyone because you'd rather carry it than watch them worry. It costs more than people know, and it costs nothing, in the end, to say so. I keep coming back to the moment Beverly said it's Cody's birthday and stopped arguing about whether we should go. That was the whole sentence. That was everything. 43 years of marriage, and I knew exactly what it meant. She wasn't going for the dinner or the restaurant or any of it. She was going because she still believed in her son, even when the evidence had been quietly stacking up against that belief for a long time. That's the thing about people who are raised to be decent. They keep extending grace long after a reasonable person would have stopped. Beverly never complained about the insulin cost, never mentioned the insurance denials at the dinner table, never let Cody hear the worry in her voice on the phone. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, steadily, without drama, with that particular kind of quiet strength that people mistake for being fine when it's actually something much harder than that. It takes real character to carry weight without advertising it. It also means the people who love you can go a very long time without understanding what you're carrying. Cody isn't a bad man. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. What happened to him was more subtle than badness. He'd built a life that rewarded him for looking forward and moving fast, and somewhere in that process, he stopped looking back. He stopped asking the questions that don't have easy answers. He measured our well-being by our silence, and we, Beverly and I both, had been too careful with him for too long, too unwilling to put our difficulty in his path. That's on us as much as it's on him, but here's what I've come to believe, sitting with all of it in the months since. The moment I put that envelope on the table, it wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of honesty. And honesty, the real kind, the kind that costs something to deliver, is almost always an act of love, even when it doesn't feel like one in the room. What I needed Cody to understand wasn't the numbers. It was the shape of a life lived with integrity. The way you show up, even when it's inconvenient, the way you ask the question, even when you're afraid of the answer. The way you keep your word not because anyone is watching, but because you said you would. Those things don't happen by accident. They have to be chosen. Again and again, sometimes when you're exhausted and sometimes when choosing them costs you something real. The choices we make compound over time. Shara's dismissiveness at that table wasn't a single bad moment. It was the accumulated result of 100 smaller choices to treat other people's dignity as negotiable. Cody's absence from our lives for 14 months wasn't cruelty. It was the accumulated result of choosing comfort over attention, ease over effort. And my silence about the $46,000, about the insulin, about all of it, that was my own accumulation, my own pattern of choosing to protect people from difficulty instead of trusting them with truth. The envelope changed things because it broke the pattern. Not loudly, not with any satisfaction, just clearly the way a bone fracture shows up on an X-ray. Here is where the weight was too much. Here is where something gave. What came after? Cody driving to Tulsa with no agenda, sitting in a waiting room with a book, fixing the fence gate I'd been meaning to get to. That wasn't him performing redemption. That was him figuring out, day by day, what it actually means to be someone's son. The willingness to do that, to sit in the discomfort of what you got wrong and keep showing up anyway. That takes more than good intentions. It takes a kind of stubborn, unglamorous courage that nobody applauds because it doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It happens on a Tuesday morning, and then again on Wednesday. I'm 68 years old. I've had long enough to watch how things turn out, and what I know is this. The people who end up with lives they're genuinely proud of are almost never the ones who were the smartest or the most successful by whatever measure the world was using that decade. They're the ones who kept choosing honesty over comfort, kept asking the hard question, kept showing up after they got it wrong. That's all any of us can do. Keep showing up. Keep asking. Don't wait until someone puts an envelope on the table to find out what the people you love have been carrying.